Good evening, everyone. I am Francisco González de Canales, Diploma Unit Tutor at the EA. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce CAL tonight. CAL is Collective for Architecture Lebanon. It's formed by intellectually restless young designers, Shereen, Doummar, Elias, Tamer, Edouard, Souhaid, and Lin Shamoun. Some of them actually were related to this house. Some of them had the misfortune of being my students a long time ago. But it was also my joy to see how much they have grown since those old times. The interest of CAL, it is to raise awareness on how the planning the territory in the Arab world has been so important to developing an idea of the narratives, the politics, and everything that is really an important issue in that region. And they have done that through several means. Conferences, exhibitions, books, like the one that we are presenting today, a super beautiful book, if you have a look at it. I have only a few minutes to look at the full content of it, but the way in which it has been crafted is quite wonderful, and I think that you should have a look at it. It's £6 less than usual today, so you should take the opportunity. I had the opportunity also to be part of the first conference that the group organized in Beirut. It was a great success. It was full of people at the American University of Beirut, and part of this debate was extended to the book that we are presenting today. In the end is how the narratives and the politics and all these relevant issues are in a way also framed through the planning of the territory. That is something that is not so much discussed in the Arab world, and also the architecture. I think that we have a lot of scholarship on any other type of environment or realm, but the Arab territory is still demanding a lot of work and a lot of reflection, and I think that this book is a fantastic contribution to that. It's more than 20 authors offering insights on the matter, and it also keeps the energy and the vitality that the group of CAL is having since the time that I met them, first as students and now in this Beirut conference and the book. So, as I said, it's a great pleasure to introduce back home this group of designers, and I hope that you have the chance to have a look at the book, because I think it's a fantastic contribution to the discussion of the planning of the Arab world today. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Francisco, for introducing us, and allow me to introduce CAL again. For those who don't know us, the founders are Edouard, Souhaid, who isn't with us today, Elias, Shereen, and myself. So, CAL is an NGO geared towards disseminating to the larger public research about architecture, the relationship between architecture and politics in the Arab world. So anyways, let me tell you a little bit about Beit Beirut. Beit Beirut used to be an outpost for snipers on the Green Line during the Civil War, dividing west from East Beirut. So it was very interesting for everyone to visit this building during the Amran exhibition, because it's usually not open to the public. Okay, so the forum was divided into two parts: the exhibition and, as Francisco said, a conference at AUB. The exhibition showcased several projects of young architects that are Lebanese and from the Arab world, and they were tackling the relationship between the state and territorial planning. The conference at AUB, the American University of Beirut, was a series of lectures by international keynote speakers, and you can find those videos actually on YouTube and on our website, so if you want to rewatch the different lectures. And during the conference, we discussed the relationship between architecture, territorial planning, and politics. And we realized that we were operating the context where the research and literature about this very crucial subject was lacking, which is why we decided to create the book. Our beautiful book. The book is very special to us. It took us 3 years to have it published. And we launched a crowdfunding campaign to fund it and to be able to actually produce it. We managed to raise around £12,000 for that. So we actually want to thank all our backers that are here. The book consists of 28 contributions written pro bono by 38 young researchers from the Arab world. They put forward a fresh perspective differing from the current Western prevailing point of view.
Hi, so I'm Shereen, one of the editors of the book, and Francisco's ex-student as well. So we all know that the field of architecture is often thought as too technical or too complicated or too scary for the general public, right? Outside of these walls, it's a bit scary to read a book about architecture, but it's intrinsic to our everyday life. And on this basis, it affects and is affected by various sectors that govern our lives, like economics and politics. And so today, to understand the state in which the nations of the Arab world find themselves in, it's not only important to understand the politics, but it's also important to understand the tools that have been used in order to advance that politic. And one of the most important one is territorial planning. So constructing a nation-state post-colonial independence, which is basically most of the countries of the Arab world, it relies on a very important strategy. And that strategy is the propagation of national narratives. So national narratives are stories that the people in power tell their citizens in order to bring them together behind a single narrative of belonging. And that's what the nation is built on. Whereas the state is the structure that will govern the nation. And these narratives can be transmitted through different means, such as literature, arts, movies. But one of the most important and powerful ones is architecture. So we're now going to run you through very quickly a few of the contributions from the book that tell the story of how structures of power have used architecture as a tool to consolidate their power over their territories. And we will have a Q&A after that to answer any question you might have about the content as well. We also have some of the authors joining us here tonight. So in the Gulf, one of the richest countries, Kuwait, has had its border prescribed by British imperial practices that were primarily upon the approach of defining territorial sovereignty. And in Asil Yaqub's essay, we understand that actually Kuwait's boundaries withstood multiple processes that designed its physical limits, location, and purpose. And as a result, its borders operated as a spatial designator and conceptual frame that defined the nation's cultural identity, political affiliation, and ways of being. This process enabled concepts of nationality to function as the primary relationship that bound individuals to the nation-state, simultaneously separating and confining the people within its boundaries. So she explained in her contribution that the role and the power of cartography is still very potently used by the state of Kuwait to govern even today. On the more extreme case, a government which has used the urban environment to violently control its territory is the Syrian government, with a history that spans decades in such practices. So in this essay from Souhaid and Majd called A Spatio-Political Anatomy of Damascus, they look at the changes in policies during the mandate of the Ba'ath Party under the rule of Hafiz al-Assad from the early 1960s to the 2000s, in which a socialist economic agenda was pursued. And then they look at the policies during the rule of Bashar al-Assad, his son, from 2000 up to 2011, which assumed a more economically liberal agenda. And during both periods, urban elements have been instrumentalized by authoritarian governments, which they were both, in times of peace and war, to pursue political interests and hence enforce a political narrative. And similarly, we can also see something along the same lines in Libya, following its independence. Master plans have been formed around a particular ideological or political position that reflect the ambitions of national narratives perpetuated by whichever government was in power at the time. So urban space was shaped and controlled during the socialist and the failed democratic state. So that's pre and post Arab Spring. And the former was a period of a strategic, multi-level, integrated territorial planning system that was enforced by laws under the Gaddafi authoritarian reign. And the latter, post-2011, was a conflict-ridden city that was actually very fragmented with dynamics that were contesting urban space. And so Mahmoud and Noor in this essay kind of unravel the differences between both and how these strategies were both used during also, let's say, peace and war times. Now, as we look at more broadly, national identities through the Arab world, they were often in conflict with prevailing pan-Arabism movements that were happening in the 50s, which was around the time that some of these countries took their independence. And so there was this relationship between pan-Arabism and Western protectorates, the ex-colonies. And since many countries in their early formation were still partly controlled by Western influences, often urban strategies were used as an effective tool to hold on to their power, their identity, their national pride. And Kuwait and its ruling elite went to great lengths to do just that. So the wealth and the discovery of that came with oil meant that the countries of the Gulf had to maintain their relationship with their protectorate nations, whom actually gave them that power, but also gave them a place in international politics. And on the other hand, they had to deal with the activists that were fighting just as hard in order to create a unified Arab identity. So this parallel growth of pan-Arabism, local wealth, and independence led to a change in urban residential form that followed the trials of the time. And so Safia in her essay explains that in an effort to quell the increasing political tensions, a series of building regulations and shifting spatial practices were managed by the government in order to separate local and foreign populations, loyal and unloyal ideological camp. And that was done through housing typologies and creating neighborhoods that were segregated from other neighborhoods in order to control the population. So while the intentions of these practices had arguably failed in their effect, the remaining spatial conditions can still be read across the built environment today.
So I'm just going to introduce a couple more essays before we all get to enjoy the free alcohol and drinks that we have planned for you. So I'm going to talk about the essay of Ali that did his contribution about Bahrain. Housing had a vital role in reinforcing the patriarchal family-oriented idea of the Arab citizen, and in Bahrain it was deemed to be the issue at the crux of the unrest, and if solved, all the other issues would be forgotten. The government announced that it would begin a journey to build 40,000 units by 2022 from a wait list of over 60,000 applications. In the Bahraini context, this would mean a 25% increase in the housing stock. This gargantuan endeavor was never completed due to the multiple issues, national and regional, but also because of the dominant typology at the time, which was the single-family villa, deemed extensive land reclamation and infrastructure issues that it was causing. A large infrastructure project were also efficient means to control narrative, especially water infrastructure, water being one of the most scarce resource in the Arab world. In this essay, François Nour explained the tension around the topic in the region and the potential future conflict that it might generate. In the meantime, in Lebanon, the fractious political climate has ignored its urban environment since the end of the civil war in the 1990s. The government organized itself as a political sectarian parties, and with impunity, these parties continue to rule post-war Lebanon till today, with all the chaos that it has brought to the country. The overarching narrative is fractured and depends on each political party, which have embodied the social, political, culture, and economic key values through speech, education, and culture. The fractured state structure reinforced schemes in which the territory or communal boundaries are shaped through the network of materiality, infrastructure that service the people that use in their everyday lives. In this essay, Karine, Christine, and Peter unravel how this has required residents to be dependent on their communities and political parties, which have imbued political sectarian transformation in all sectors, but most frequently in the transport infrastructure sector. Transport infrastructure is also a means for neoliberal government to give large tender to private entities in order to accumulate wealth and encourage corruption. And this can be seen very clearly in the BRT, which is the bus rapid transport system that Amman is developing right now. So it's kind of impressive for a city like Amman that they have developing this bus rapid transit system. And lastly, I want to talk about Mahdi Sabbar's essay, which tells the story of how Damascus Gate in Jerusalem, how Damascus Gate in Jerusalem, which is the main entrance to the old city, and the connector to East Jerusalem, that connects East Jerusalem to the economic center, turned into an important site of protest, mourning, and festivity. But more importantly, an architectural spectacle and a stage for collaborative action rendered visible between the push and pull that is happening between the Palestinian residents of the city that are claiming the site as their public space and the Israeli state that is determined to take control of the site and impose its authority on East Jerusalem. In his essay, he understands that the event the event at Damascus Gate are not isolated incidents, but in connection to and at the continuity with global struggle of decolonization and the right for the city. Finally, I want to say that the book covers critical issues that have shaped the Arab world. Even though each country has a different political and economic climate, all the issues repeat across the Arab world. Those issues can be found in different forms across the rest of the world as well. This book, for the first time, brings these individual points of view together to form a conversation, but most importantly, to tell the story of the importance of architecture and urban planning in the building of a nation. And now I just want to give the floor to one of our contributors that is here. So, yes, of course. So Omnia will quickly talk to you about, just try not to move the...
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. I'm extremely, how do you say this? Very touched to be with you here today, and especially to see the book, because this took years. And for me specifically, our research took even longer years. So it was supposed to be published in a different publication, but I'm so glad that it ended up with you here. And especially, how do you say that? We've been always wanting to do stuff for the Arab world. We sometimes, through the research we do, we get lost with the type of research happening internationally. And I have to say I'm quite honored today to see that this work has been done by Arabs for Arabs at the end as well. That's in itself is something that is very important and need to be highlighted, because doing research in the Arab world is complicated, is very risky as well, and we don't have access to resources. I will tell you a little bit what we did, but it is very much of a personal engagement. You have to take this and to believe in what you're doing in a way, and to continue, because it's disheartening and it's depressing, and you have to find the people to drag you so that you can get to continue, because most of the time you don't have institutions supporting you and backing you and financing you, etc. So please, and I needed to underline that this is colossal, what happened with Collective for Architecture, and they deserve a big, big, big thank you. So I co-authored this paper with Galila Al-Adi, who's a professor of urbanism, and she used to teach in France and in Egypt. She's now retired, but she's continuing the fight. And I've learned so much from Galila, because she's my mom's age, basically, that, you know, the fight will go on. We should not give up. I decided today to be quick, not really to tell you about what we've written, but to tell you about moments that made us stop and think about this article that we're presenting to you in the book. This is a photo I took in 2013 when I was walking in Al-Azhar Park. Perhaps you know, if you've heard of Cairo. The Aga Khan gifted Cairo with a beautiful park, which used to be the historic garbage dump of the city, basically, and now it has water reservoirs, and a beautiful park is built on them. This was after 2011, which is an important year in Egypt with what happened with the revolution. And as you see, all these red bricks are illegal construction that started popping out in the historic city. This is a site that has been listed on UNESCO World Heritage site since 1979. It's the historic city of Cairo, which was built over 1,000 years. And it's a neighborhood that I still, until today, I've been working in it for the past 20 years. Okay, now I'll take you a step back and tell you a little bit as well how me, and also with the help of Galila, and we're a bunch of us, a group of us in Cairo actually, and we call ourselves the Safe Cairo Gang. But these are moments that made us stop and think. And I actually took the quote that Foreign Policy magazine wrote under this image. So they said, ordinary citizen locked arms Saturday to protect the Egyptian Museum. Why? Because Friday, the night before, the 28th of January 2011, the Egyptian Museum was attacked and pieces were stolen and other pieces were broken. Afterwards, everything was retrieved. But you know, the 25th, so the Tuesday before, there was a call for a demonstration in the streets. I went to the club. The Friday, people started again going to the street, but I also went back with my son to the club. But then what happened in the evening is the museum was hit. And this is when I believe, and many like me believe, this was a moment for Egyptians and Cairenes when they decided, no, something is happening here. We need to go to the streets. We need to go to Tahrir. And this is what happened. Ordinary people just went in front of the Egyptian Museum. Why? Because the Egyptian Museum is our mothership for culture heritage. Everything happens around the Egyptian Museum, even though now they say, well, you know, they're building so many other museums in Egypt. But this museum will always remain the symbol of the nation. And exactly like Shereen was saying, you always need to gather people around a common cause. I don't think that the looters had the intention to gather Egyptians around the cause, but this is what happened. And then you know what happens afterwards with the Egyptian revolution. Then another moment that involves also the museum, that was 2 years ago, the April 2021, so 10 years after. What happened? The Egyptian state decided to stage a big event because they had to move 22 mummies of kings and queens of Egypt from the Egyptian Museum to the newly built National Museum for Egyptian Civilization. And to do so, they had a huge parade. And now if you take Egypt Air, you even find the parade on the screens. But we were not there. We were not allowed to be in the streets. Tahrir was closed entirely. The city became the stage for the state, for their, you know, the feeling that they want to project. Egypt is safe, Egypt is good, because the state narrative here is, we want tourists back, you see? So when we Egyptians took the street, it's because we need to preserve our identity, we need to protect our heritage. But when the state is doing a huge event that costs millions, it is not directed to us Egyptian, it is directed to the outside. It's like, you know, Egypt is welcoming everyone, please come see, the streets are safe and empty actually, but we were not allowed in. What happened in the years of after 2011 until 2015 was not hugely reported, and I would like to hear back from you as well, because Egypt was, and the Egyptian heritage was constantly under attack. This is the Museum of Malawi in 2013. This is the Institut d'Egypte, very important archive in which actually Egypt managed to prove that Taba is part of Egypt and not part of Israel. So very important cartography was saved in here. And this is the monastery of Tadros. This all happened with this security void created after the revolution. this one, and these two happened when when we had the other coup with the Muslim Brothers, and so this was their revenge, saying, "Oh, you don't want us anymore. We're going to destroy your museums. We're going to destroy your historic religious spaces." This one in particular is very close to my heart. That's why I decided to mention it. This is the Museum of Islamic Art. On the 24th of January 2014, I woke up at 6 in the morning from the sound, and there was a smoke coming out of downtown. And I went to Twitter to check what's happening, and they said, well, Daesh planted a bomb in a car in front of the security building of Cairo. And then I looked at my husband, I said, the museum is just in front. So at 8 a.m., I was in front of the museum, and this is actually my team at the Egyptian Heritage Rescue Foundation, because we're trained to something called First Aid to Cultural Heritage, and we evacuated the objects of the museum that day. But that was a turning point for me personally in my career, in saying that I have to focus on what's happening. We need to understand, why is heritage becoming like a political tool as well? We don't think about it because we think that heritage is sometimes with the state is luxury, but this was a clear message that cultural heritage is targeted. Very quickly, I'm just going to show you, we've been campaigning. These are images that we've sent to the governor, explaining to him that, look what's happening to the historic city. There's illegal construction happening all the time. There's absolutely no law enforcement, and this beautiful mimbar was entirely looted. And our archive is being you've catched in fire. I'm going to show you, this is just an image I found in one of the talks I've given perhaps more than 10 years ago. And just a thought, these are 3 beautiful courtyard houses. In here, I was just showing the topography and the architecture of the historic city. And then here, I took these out. This is Beit al-Muhandis, Beit Qurra, Beit Matkur, Beit al-Muhandis. And this is what happened. We've lost them entirely. But this is done by law, by the state, because they don't have any layer of protection. And this image over there, I took it last week. This is just to say that how we professionals are looking at our heritage and our architectural memory is completely different on how the state is taking decisions. I'm not showing flyovers like you've shown, Elias, but flyovers and highways leading to the new capital that Egypt is building has terribly affected the city. And these are the historic cemeteries, the necropole of Cairo, 1,400 years of history in here. And again, we unfortunately are admitting that we have failed to protect it, and we don't understand how these decisions are made, but the only narrative that we can see is that heritage is only used when you put it in a museum or when you find an archaeological site. But when it's a living heritage and it's a city and it's the memory of the place of the people living in this city, unfortunately, there's still a lot to do with decision makers so that they would at least comprehend what we're trying to protect here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Omnia. I think we're just going to sit at the table if you want to join us too. And I'm not sure, I think there might be a few more authors here with us tonight. Maybe Hanadi wants to join us. Elias as well, to answer any of your questions and maybe to have a further discussion into what we just discussed. Hello? Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly introduce Hanadi Samhan. She's Lebanese, and I'm going to let her maybe, sorry, Palestinian Lebanese. I'm just going to give you the microphone, so maybe you can tell the audience quickly what you wrote about, and we can...
Hello, everyone. So I'm Hanadi. I insisted on Palestinian because I was born as a refugee in Lebanon. And I lived my life in Beirut as a Palestinian refugee. I actually, just a brief introduction about myself, I actually got my education at an Islamic school, and then I did my BA and Master's at the American University. And then I worked into the private sector of urban development, and I worked on large urban projects in the Gulf cities. And I worked in Saudi when women were not allowed to work 12 years ago. So And I said that because at some point I felt I need more. So I'm doing my PhD now at the Bartlett, and I'm working on the camps because although I live my life in Lebanon, I never felt that I belong to the country. My husband is Lebanese, but I never felt belonging to the country. So I always thought that going into the camp is a place where I can find some kind of attachments of language, of food, of everything. Now, I'm working on the vertical camps, and I call them vertical because these camps in Lebanon, after 73 years of protracted migration, they've become what I call them a jungle of concrete. We're talking about buildings of up to 14 floors in camps in Beirut. What I wrote about in the article, and the article is a part of my research, is about that although these camps have shared the same story of establishment, they grew to become different. And the main argument is that the camps in Beirut and the north are most developed. They're becoming really tall and consolidated, while the camps in the further south, in Saida and Sur, they're actually less developed and more controlled. And this is, and I'm trying to investigate what this opaque space has become to be in Lebanon, what kind of sovereignty and control these camps are being dealt with, basically. That's it. I'm not sure. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, we're just going to open the floor if anyone has... Can you hear me? If anyone has any question? Don't be shy.
Who has a question?
It's a very tough topic.
No questions, guys? Really?
It needs to be digested still.
We have a question over here.
Oh yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, I haven't prepared, but I'm very curious to know how you came about building this project. It's very interesting. I've been to the exhibition in Beit Beirut, and I really liked it. So I'm curious to know a bit more about how you got together as CAL and what pushed you to launch this project.
Thanks for having the courage to ask the first question, first of all. No, for us it was, maybe as Shereen and the rest, and especially Omnia mentioned it's very difficult to find research in the Arab world about our cities in general, about our heritage, about what is going on, because it's either censored or there's a lack of fund, there's other priorities. You know, the Arab world is unfortunately a place today where there's other priorities, let's say, than research for the government, at least. So that's their priorities. So for us, it was important to collect this data. You know, this is the beginning, of course, and it was very important for us to have as well people from the Middle East writing for the book and not have this whole book written from a Western perspective, so from Western universities and whatsoever. So that's how it came to be. And then, of course, you know, we cannot thank enough our backers for the crowdfunding that allowed this book to come to life. And yeah, Shereen, if you want to add anything to that as well.
Yeah, just to answer the question about how we got together as a group, it was about 4 years ago. And I think I had just graduated from the AA, or about, after a year after, and Elias, I think, was still studying here. And I think we both, and as well as Edouard, who's our third co-founder, we all worked on projects about Lebanon, actually, because we're all Lebanese, during our years studying. And we had a really hard time, actually, finding good references, but mostly, as Elias said, finding information that was written by people from the Arab world, about the Arab world. And it was something we had discussed a lot, and we thought that there was also some sort of schism as to what was happening in universities abroad versus universities back in Lebanon. There are lots of Arab students here at the AA and in the UK and so on and so forth, doing some great projects, but they're not on the ground. But there are also some students in Lebanon that are also doing some great work. And unfortunately, we realized that there was, let's say, a sort of separation and segregation between universities, especially in Lebanon. And we thought about, our work existed here for maybe about 2 years, and then it went on the AA website, and they were never discussed, and they were important projects for Lebanon. And so we thought, why not gather all of the good academic projects that were done in London and wherever we could find them, and bring them together with projects that were also done in Lebanon, and bring them all under one roof. And that's how we started Humran. It was the exhibition first, and then we thought about the conference and actually turning this into a conversation. And I have to say, it was we felt that was pretty successful, and we also thought, Lebanon is a place for culture, and it's what defines us. And we felt that we should have a sort of biennale of architecture in Lebanon, and that was kind of our driving thought. Let's say our ambitious idea behind the project. But then, as you all know, in 2019 we had the revolution, and then all the money that used to go into cultural projects just started going, obviously, into humanitarian projects, which is absolutely understandable, and which is why also the whole Arab world suffers from that lack of. I have to say that maybe the countries of the Gulf have better funding, but that's just oil.
I mean, I just want to say another thing. For example, the exhibition we did in Beit Beirut, what Lynn mentioned at the beginning, it's a building that, it was on the front line. It's a sniper house. A lot of people died during the war trying to cross the street because of the snipers in the building. And fortunately enough, the building was saved from destruction after the Civil War. But it was supposed to be turned into the Museum of Memory, the memory of the Civil War. And unfortunately, for political reason, of course, the museum hasn't been open for the past 20 years. So it's completed, it's ready to open, but it has no visitors. Yeah, this one. And what we managed to do is to get this building open for the first time for a whole month during the summer. I know it sounds little, but for a building that is permanently closed, it was a great opportunity for us to see that Lebanese people could finally come into this building and look at their own history, because in general in Lebanon, history is not taught in school for political reasons. They haven't agreed on how to write the chapter of the Civil War, so this is completely ignored by Lebanese people, and it was important for us as well to have people gain access to that building. So we're not only doing publications, we're doing exhibitions, and we're doing cultural events in Lebanon. As Shereen said, the situation was a bit easier than the country went bankrupt because of the same people that fought during the Civil War. So, yeah, we're moving around.
I have a question to Omnia, because you were talking about the heritage quite a lot. And I think it's quite it's a difficult topic for me, because I also grew up in a country where it was partially destroyed during a war, which is Korea. And when I go back and I see all these reconstruction projects of old palaces, which I think more than half of it was destroyed during the occupation and Korean War, I sometimes wonder what the actual purpose of heritage protection is, and to what degree, right? Because we can't obviously, reconstruct everything that was destroyed. So yeah, that was my question.
Preserving heritage is a very, very difficult task, because you're often asked, why are you doing this? For Beit Matkour, I've been trying since 2014 to protect it from demolition. And even we've been nagging to the extent that the Prime Minister went himself to see it, and he looked at it and he said, do you want to demolish this? He looked at the governor. So it's really becoming, if you don't have clear legislations and laws, you cannot save it. And this is the problem we're facing in Egypt, because we are a very old nation, you know, and so antiquity is mainly what runs heritage, and that's where is urban heritage when it comes? Not everything is a museum and an archaeological site. And cities are important. I showed you one of the doorways. That doorway was my indication that I needed to take the right afterwards to go to where I'm going. It is part of the memory of the place. And I think when we lose it, we get lost as well, because these are like points de repère, points of reference. And we cannot keep on changing our cities, because then we will lose our stories. And I think this is at least why I'm doing what I'm doing, of you know, shouting loud and saying, you cannot destroy the house. It needs to be protected, because I believe that places live, and a place is when you enter it and you feel it's beautiful, because there is time that has passed. And this is something that you lack when you go into new places. They still need to live. So you already have the time. And I remember reading ages ago, but I don't remember who wrote this, but someone wrote that this place have seen sweat, have seen laughter, have seen dust, have seen cries, and this is why it has this energy that it has. I so much believe in the energies of places, and I think cities is really like that, and that's why we want to protect them. We cannot beautify it from time. You need to let it live, but as much as you can, you need to just keep their memories. I think this is what connects us generation after the other. I don't know if it makes sense, but this is how I'm feeling it, and this is how I feel bad when I lose one of those courtyard houses.
And I feel like destroying heritage is an act of warfare, and somehow if there's nobody to protect that, you kind of become vulnerable to your opponent in a way. I think it's fine, and part of protecting heritage is, you know, protecting the identity, but part of destroying heritage is also trying to create a new identity. And I think that sometimes, especially in Egypt, that has been done very purposefully in order to create a new narrative. Every time that a new government comes in, there's a part of the heritage that is destroyed in order to kind of recreate a new narrative that kind of helps that government, you know, secure its power somehow.
Well, at the end of the day, architecture is the easiest way to show power. It has been since the Middle Ages, and still today. Yeah. Thank you for your question. Made me think.
Hi. Oh, it's loud. Sorry. I'm interested to know your perspective about international narrative. I know that this book focuses on national narratives, but I'm interested to see if you believe that international and national narratives are intertwined.
Yeah, I'm going to try to answer that. I mean, we're looking at the Arab world, but in general, I think that every country has a national narrative. Some make it more obvious than others. You know, every country has a hero and an anti-hero and a common enemy, and you know what they aspire to be like. It can be built through music, through cinema, through more subtle propaganda or not. But yeah, I think that this is something, sometimes you realize it, other times you don't, depending on which part of the world you are. Some do a better job at making it more discreet than others. But maybe it's an idea for the next publication to go internationally.
But I also do think that, I'm just going to give the example of Lebanon because that's the one I know best. I would have to say that international narratives and national narratives are actually very intertwined, because on a more subtle level, for example, in Lebanon, the way they build the national narrative is not entirely inwards looking. It's very much controlled by international narratives, and I'm hoping that this is what you mean, that are narratives that are more global or more regional, but yeah, I think like Elias said, we haven't really delved into that, but I can definitely see the definite influence of international narratives on those national narratives, and very much so politically, which of course does affect the urban, territorial, and even large-scale projects. Like we have one essay about water infrastructure in Lebanon. Well, it's not actually in Lebanon, but it looks at Lebanon more closely, but it looks at the whole Arab world. And you can actually understand that one narrative from one country is influencing what is happening elsewhere, and you can see that physically on those large infrastructural projects, especially hydro infrastructure. So, yeah.
Can I just add a word in the mix here? I think while I'm listening to you, I think it's also the dilemma between modernity and tradition, because whenever the argument is always we're developing, we're modernizing, we're bringing infrastructure that cities need, but this is on the account of the city itself. Of when I'm saying tradition here, about its historic urban fabric, about its architectural morphology, and sometimes the argument is like, we shouldn't discuss this because we're making your city modern, so why are you upset? You see, so that's also one of the dilemmas we face.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You talked about this as a curatorial project as well as a book, and I wonder if you could say something about audience responses or community responses to the work. That's it.
Actually, so this book came out about a month ago, just in Beirut. So this is our second event. We started distributing it actually starting next week in Europe, and then in the Arab world, but then in the States at the end of the month. So I have to say honestly that we haven't heard so much feedback just yet. I think today is one of the more open conversation we've had about it, but we're definitely looking forward to kind of taking that conversation to other universities, especially in the Middle East, and we do have some plans for the spring for that. I think in general, I would say even from the contributors, it's been, the main response has been that there aren't that many books. Well, there are no books that bring together voices from the Arab world, from all over the Arab world, as much as we could. And these are not people who have written extensively in the past. These are upcoming researchers, a lot of them, and I think it was very important for us to kind of allow the space for that new perspective rather than republish something that has been widely published. So I think so far we've had some good responses, but we're definitely looking to hear more.
Hi. I just wanted to know more how you decided on the authors.
Sure. Hi. And so actually the way we work as a collective is that first we do our research. Obviously we try to find as a group what we're interested in, or what are the topics that we would like to pursue. But every time we do a project, we actually open it to the larger public. So through our social media channels, we've also done an open call. And I think Hanadi was one of the open call essays. And then we had a jury to select the essays that came through the open call. The rest of the essays, we basically reached out to people we knew, or people that told us about other people, or people we've researched. And actually, it was very hard to find essays from certain countries of the Arab world, and in specific, it was Yemen, because it's very hard to get on the ground in Yemen right now, and so there's very little research. We did find somebody, and unfortunately, that couldn't happen. But it's not like, I have to say, we didn't have a huge choice, and we didn't have to sift through and make very hard decisions. And it kind of tells you the story of, you know, the lack of research, or but yeah, this is how we did it. And we obviously had a brief, so we started by writing a text that we sent to some people, and whoever was answering with something that was directly responding to our brief, I think we took that on board, and we tried to cover all the countries and kind of keep an equilibrium. Yeah, so we missed Yemen, and we missed Oman, very sadly, actually. I think that was it, right?
No, just to respond to that question of which country we missed, when we started the project, it was, the first thing was to define what is the Arab world, because there's a couple of definitions for it. You can take the Arab League, which is a couple of countries that stretch from North Africa to the Arabian Peninsula, but except maybe some, let's say, language and religious conviction, they're very different. Or you can take like the stretch that goes from North Africa or just the Middle East. So it was very hard for us to define what territory we're operating on. So as a reference, we took the countries of the Arab League, and for example, if you take that, then Somalia is in, then Sudan is in, so Mauritania is in as well, so Djibouti is in, and we had to filter a bit because, as Shereen said, it was very difficult for us to find research specific to those countries. Also, I think there's a kind of disconnection between the countries that are more influenced from the French system, like old French colonies that operate more, in a French system that write in French, and the other more English countries. Sorry, you wrote in French.
We had to translate a few.
Yeah, so geography.
I think if we don't have any more questions, we can sell some books and have some drinks. Oh, actually, let's take one more. There's one more question at the back, Lynn.
Thanks very much, and I do congratulate you. It's a big achievement. I did run a magazine once in Jordan, and I do understand how difficult it is to publish in the Arab world. So you mentioned Arab Voices, which is really to be commended, and you opposed that to Western discourse. However, obviously I haven't read the book yet, but the snippets at the start kind of seem to converge with some of the Western discourse on planning, on national identity in cities. So I'd like to know what, for you, distinguishes the Arabic academic voice from a Western rhetoric about the Arab world.
Yeah, I can just say that for us, all the essays that were written in a conversation with the contributors. So initially, there was few contributors that had already written fully about the topic, especially relating to national narratives and introducing, this layer of political and social factors within their essay, relating it to the urban and architectural build. This being said, it was every essay, as I said, was a conversation with the contributors. So we made sure with the contributors that we're not going into the typical lens of what the Western world is interested, but more to find, you will read it in the book, a lot of things are not stuff that you hear a lot in like less Western discourse. So it's not the big topics that you know about, it's more localized, small scale stuff. I will encourage you to buy the book and discover for yourself. But we're talking about agriculture in Kuwait. We're talking about, a lot of things that would not come to mind when you talk about those countries. And for us, it was important that, we don't talk about the big stuff that are already known, or even get people that are, let's say, very well, extensively published or stuff, just to get a new perspective, a new fresh perspective on those countries. So, you can let us know if you agree or not on this statement once you've read the book. But thank you for that question. It's a really interesting one.
Can I add something quickly? No, just the experience of, because we already had an existing article that we finished in 2017, and when you invited us to contribute, we sat and started digging deep into what's happening, and really this allowed us to look at the situation today. So giving people like us the opportunity as well to push us to sit and try to answer the hard questions. This was not easy to write and not even easy to analyze and think through, because we don't have platforms in which we discuss such topics. That's also one thing. So for us, for the Egypt case, we went back and we thought about all the management policies that were in place since the 50s, and then what is happening in Egypt today? We are asking ourselves. So, and this is an amazing opportunity, and I really have to thank you for it, because it faced us with the answers that we just didn't want to see, and now we have, it's very obvious in front of us, because we came to a conclusion at least. So yeah, it wasn't easy, but it was essential and important, so thank you.
I think we're ready to have some drinks. So I just want to say thank you to Omnia one more time, and to Hanadi and all the authors. Yeah. And I just do want to say one little thing before we stand up. Our collective is a non-profit organization, and everything we've done here and the authors was pro bono, and it's things that we do aside from our professional life. And so I'm immensely grateful for everyone who contributed in the book, because that's why we're here today. So thank you.
And one more thing, thank you everyone for coming. If one day you want to be part of one of our projects, follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our newsletter.